All right, so without any further ado, Ms. Di-Ann Eisnor is here from Waze. And I'm so glad it worked out. She had other obligations down in Palo Alto.
So sorry if I kept you guys waiting and I was not stuck in traffic, as Miles told you, because he thought it would be funny to make fun of the Waze lady. I was actually at back to school night for my kids in Palo Alto, and so you have to prioritize. That's cool. There we go. Does everybody here know Waze, or at least heard? Yay! All right, good, good. So we started the company about 6 years ago. I don't know what you guys really want to hear about it, so I'm going to tell you what we're up to now. We sold the company to Google just over a year ago, and with great enthusiasm and also trepidation, as any of you guys have ever sold companies can imagine. The idea for us going into this was, how do we maintain Waze speed, because we're all incredibly dedicated to the mission, with Google scale? Can we take this and put it into a much bigger stage? And so I'm going to show you one of the projects we're working on that's kind of my pet that I've been working on for just over a year. But first, start with a little bit of background. So staying true to the Waze mission, the idea is to save people time every day, every driver. And the thing that was important to us from starting the company through acquisition was that we could do that and do it autonomously, and to fail as we need to, succeed as we need to do that. So that's still the core. So you guys know that everything we do is crowdsourced. And so we are constantly working. I think when we sold the company, I guess we said we were at about 50 million drivers. It's obviously more now, although we're not allowed to discuss as many things publicly as we did then. So we've got these 50 million-ish people driving around, and we're anonymously collecting the GPS traces and timestamps so that we can reroute you and hopefully save you time if something happens or changes on the route. There's an accident, there's an incident, there's a snowstorm, and how do we get you from point A to point B as things change like they do in the real world? So we've got the driver community that I just mentioned, and they're out there driving around, and they can be passive, they can be anonymous, they don't do anything, they don't touch their phone, they use the navigation service, and we're collecting the data and they're contributing. The second thing is the map editor community. So we have about 500,000 people around the world that want to make sure that the data in their area where they drive is accurate. So they go to the website, they will give a street name, they will give whatever information we might not have. We're often the first people to have a closed road, the first people to have a new neighborhood. If a street changes direction, people will do that. And that's pretty important. It's kind of the heart of everything we do. And I would say that there's probably about 500 of those people that we call global champs, and we treat them as if we would treat our team. They're a part of our organizational structure. They have contact with us. We're on WhatsApp with them. We meet them once a year in different places around the world. And then a third component, which is new, which is local government. And this is something I'm super excited about, because as we think about particularly road closures, even with all the drivers we have around the world, we're not going to know every marathon, every street fair, every flood, every protest that breaks out, and we don't want to be routing people through there. So we need to work locally in order to make that happen. So we have a few examples of what we've been doing in creating what we're calling a global traffic center. And this is, how are we exchanging information between the citizens and cities to make sure that we're surfacing as many of those incidents as we can and keep everybody safer and kind of getting where they need to be. So we did a lot with crisis this past year. And as you can imagine, we had the typhoon in the Philippines, we had flooding in Indonesia, we had flooding in Serbia. We had a lot going on. And in each scenario, it was difficult to get the information, but we had somebody on the road that was taking the pictures, helping us figure out what roads were open, when they were open, what roads were closed. And we came up with something where if you type help into the search bar in one of those scenarios, we'll bring everything we know into the surface. And we're not saying we know everything, obviously, but if we know where the rescue centers are, where the shelters are, evacuation routes, we're going to put everything there. So we're doing our best to really be relevant. So working with government is interesting. We've worked with FEMA during Superstorm Sandy to help surface where gas stations might be open, but even places you might not imagine, for example, NYPD. So the fireworks display that went on just this past 4th of July, one might assume that a city knows exactly what roads are going to close and what time they're going to reopen, but in reality, it changes on the fly. And again, it's very important that you're not routing people through. So we literally had a WhatsApp group with the captain of the New York Police Department there on the scene, sending us pictures, letting us know when things were open, and our map team was able to make sure that everything that happened on our application was reflecting what was happening in the real world. Obviously, we want to get to a point where all of that happens in an automated fashion, but in the meantime, we're able to get to the scale where in dozens of cities around the world, we're able to have people on the ground. And it's pretty cool to work in an environment between the real world and the digital world where the police are on WhatsApp letting you know what's happening. It's pretty cool. Lots of great results. Do you want me to, my time's up. Yeah, I'll just go a couple more minutes, and then I'll take whatever questions you want, because again, I didn't know exactly what you wanted to hear, so I'm sharing something that I'm excited about. Atlanta snowstorm. This was just 2 inches of snow that caused a 100-car pileup, and actually an entire overnight of people not being able to get to their destination. We're talking about a city who doesn't know how to handle snow. And so I'm going to read one thing that was posted by one of our users. I can't thank you enough for suggesting the Waze app. It saved me from being late, yada, yada, yada. But yesterday, it really saved me. It rerouted me around all the horrible traffic that was caused by the winter storm. I had no idea where it was taking me, but it worked. I got home in a little over 2 hours, whereas my coworker who left at the same time didn't get home till 11 a.m. this morning. That bump you see in the graph is the number of active users that we had during that snowstorm. And what that says to me is that there's a demand for this kind of information. No matter how much data we have, we're not getting that great information. Jamzilla was dozens of exits and on-ramps on the 101 in LA. It was incredibly difficult to keep track of what was open when. But thanks to working with our TV station partner, we were able to kind of work that through. I'm going to show you one last thing, which is a video of how we're being used in Rio de Janeiro's traffic control center, primarily in preparation for what was just recently the World Cup. And I want to preface by saying that the mayor went into the control room 2 weeks before the Pope was visiting last year in October and said, I want Waze in here in 2 weeks before the Pope gets here. And his team was like, okay. They called us, and literally within 2 weeks, we were the primary platform for them figuring out, as they call it, what was happening where in a very dynamic, fast-growing city. So I'll just play this.
Brazil is a very important issue. We have almost 7 million people here. Let's take a look at how we use Waze up here. This place here is the crisis room, a place where we handle tough situations. The question is, when we enter the building, what is happening and where? We have here this important road, and people are complaining about heavy traffic. And then we see a picture. We don't only know that they are telling about it, but we can see that it's loaded. We can even make some alerts in our system that will help every operator here to investigate what is happening where. This is one of those reasons that our partnership is so valuable.
We have the channel, we have the data, and we need to shorten the distance between the citizens and the city hall.
Brazil is an incredibly important market for us because they have a ton of users. And the more users we have, the better the data is. That means that we can not just save each individual time, but look at the city as a whole. And this is where we think the next part of our evolution really lies. So that's really it. How do we make more of an impact even now that we're at Google? I've known Miles for like 15 years, so when he says, can you come give us an update, I come immediately whenever he asks. I'll take any questions that you want. want to ask.
Well, I want to start with a question, and it's kind of a stinker question. Have you received any blowback from you transmitting user data to governments? Because I know there's been some blowback with Strava, and Waze has been kind of incorporated into that argument.
At the very beginning, only because people misunderstood. So it's interesting to note that all we're sharing is incident data, so very literally reports on accidents and hazards, no user data. So I think it was kind of an example of press wanting to tell our bigger story, but user privacy is actually even more rigorous at Google. So very minimal blowback, but I think we're just at the beginning of actually quite the opposite in this realm. And the other thing is what Strava's doing, and I actually use Strava, I like Strava, is that they're selling the data. So it has a kind of a conflicting business model, and we're not. We're giving it away to get better data so we can have a better service. So it's a more kind of consistent cycle which has the user at the center.
Got it. Good answer. Hands up high.
So is Waze looking at getting to multimodal transportation and avoiding the traffic of trains and buses and that stuff?
We have no plans yet, although obviously as we're trying to become more relevant in urban mobility, that's going to be key. We haven't made any decisions as to the how or how we integrate maybe with other people within Google who handle these other kinds of things. So I think long term, there needs to be some solution. I don't know that it has to be the Waze solution, but I think it's important. We're thinking about it, no decisions.
Hi, I'm just curious as far as, like California law and being on your cell phones while driving. Are you guys planning to do any sort of kind of, I don't know how to put this, you basically talk into the phone and you say what hazard or what accident is coming up to prevent an accident or prevent, let's say, a cop pulling you over for a ticket?
We do that now.
Oh, you do
so,
that now?
yeah, actually, if you try to type into the Waze app while you're driving, a pop-up will kind of block your keyboard and ask you if you're a passenger. We know when you're moving and not. And then for the actual reporting, if you wave your hand over the proximity sensor, it will say, how can I help? And you say, report traffic, report hazards. And we were the first app ever to do that. And so we know that mobile navigation is getting a lot of scrutiny, particularly in legislation. And I think that it's a little bit ridiculous, but it puts the onus on us and other people in our space to try to keep staying out in front of the safety issues.
I had a question about the Google acquisition. What has that enabled you to do, and how has it changed your business?
So obviously I can't speak in specifics about these things, but I will say in this theme of Waze speed and Google scale, most of us have never had like real jobs before until Google. And so you obviously learn a lot about doing things at a different scale than we had done before. And so I think for us, and if you see some of the work we've been doing, it's kind of a luxury to be able to think in the terms of the amount of impact and the numbers of people when we start dealing with whole cities and whole national governments and things. So I can't say that we wouldn't have done it without Google, but I think that notion of speed and scale and how we balance it has been a critical part of our thinking since the acquisition.
Oh, the question over here. So I don't know if this is a whimsical question or a proprietary question, but with Waze, I've had recently some experiences where I've just been on like beautiful local drives. Like Waze directed me to go through Hillsborough to get on 280 instead of going 101, and it was like a neighborhood I'd never driven through before. And I'm wondering, like, I read an article that like I think MIT has some sort of algorithm for like more enjoyable commutes versus just the most efficient, and I'm wondering if that's actually a part of your algorithm or this was just serendipity.
So the beauty is serendipitous. We don't have a beauty algorithm as of yet. We are focused primarily on efficiency, but we do take the personal preference of your drive into account. So if you tend to always take the Hillsborough route, or a number of people start to, we might start recommending it more. So it has to do with what people are actually doing, but primarily it's about the efficiency. So no beauty yet, although it's a nice idea.
Hi, I have a question here. I'm actually a bit concerned. I'm going to share with you a concern I have. I'm actually from Chile. I got here just a few months ago, and just before I came, it was a big thing that Waze actually was very, very, very used. And the biggest problem was that people was using it to detect where police was, because in Chile it's illegal to drive with any alcohol in your blood. So people would report it. I mean, very cheeky. We're South Americans, of course, so we try to use all these the technology for our benefit, even though it's not really a benefit. So there was the police was in the news, like saying how concerned they were because people was actually using this to avoid getting caught. And I mean, since there's a reason why we have no limit, tolerance for alcohol, right? So the rates of accidents are too high. So I don't know if you ever heard of it, and because I can tell you're very concerned about your customers, and you work with governments, and so I can see that there is a concern from Waze. So how would you tackle a problem like that if you ever got to hear about it? And if it got solved, because since I've been here, I haven't heard.
So I've heard of it. And I've heard of different versions of that from different countries. So in France, for example, it's illegal to pinpoint the exact location of police even for a speed trap. So I think it's difficult to use Waze primarily for DUI because they're frequently changing their stops, and it's not the intent. And I remember that it was probably like 2.5 years ago that Apple did a crackdown. Any app that was allowing marking police for the purposes of DUI had to be banned from the store, and they evaluated us. And they decided that that was so far from the initial intent that it was no problem. So some people might mark it, but it's not the intent of the app, and it happens fairly infrequently. But I want to flip that for a second and talk about how the police are using Waze. And people sometimes get a little freaked out, like, oh, the police are using Waze, they're going to know if I'm speeding. I'm going to tell you something super cool about NYPD, and we're not doing this at the moment, but they came to us, and their first request of us was not about sharing data. It was, can we give you the location of all of our speed traps? We want people slowing down. We want fewer accidents. We don't want to write the tickets. And I thought, wow, how contemporary of a thinker. I have other police in the UK who use Waze because our data is so fresh that the incidents, particularly accidents, will come up first in Waze before even in their control rooms. So that can mean, for example, in an accident, 10 minutes, which is a life. So there is a concern about some things like that, but I think that it's really on the fringes of the use, and we do nothing to try to enable that. That's the best answer I have, is that I'm more impressed by how police are using it and how they want to share information about keeping people safer.
Hey there. So Waze by itself is supposed to save time per user. So if there's, say, a ball game in the city, or there's some other event and there's a whole bunch of people actually coming into the city from the Bay, do you guys actually go ahead and pick different routes proactively to some extent that decide that you should try and reduce the amount of traffic on each individual roads as people are coming up to the city?
So there's a couple of different components to that question, and it's an important one because like one Giants game will back you up and add an extra hour if you're trying to get in either direction from the city to the south. When the buildup starts, Waze knows. If it were something consistent, like every Friday, it would build up the knowledge. Right now, because there's no clear pattern of when the games are, we're not predictive in that way. However, this kind of focus on the global traffic center that I was talking about, it has a lot to do with what we call major traffic events. And this is, how do you surface the events that are causing the big impact that are a little less predictable, but they are planned, somebody has the information. And we're working very hard to unlock that data. So when we started the project, we were doing 5 events a month. Now we're doing several hundred a month. And I mean, the goal would be to get to tens of thousands a month, of which hopefully Giants games would be a part of it, just because it's such a bummer from a traffic perspective. But as soon as it starts, we know. It's a little late at that point.
Question I don't know if you've touched upon this, and I'm not a Waze user, but I'm probably going to be after this. Is traffic, like, most traffic lights, they'll have the sensors and they'll determine, how backed up that place is, and then, it'll change the lights. Is this being used by traffic control in that sense at all to, mitigate those sorts of buildups?
It's being explored. I wouldn't say we have enough data yet. So different control centers are using their lighting technologies in different ways. They're also using their sensor data in different ways. We are working with a number of traffic control centers. And I think one of the things we would like in the future to be able to understand is, do we have enough knowledge to make a smarter algorithm for the timing of the lights? But that's still very early stages of testing.
Hi, I have a question. So I trust Waze every single day. I sign up Waze because I want to identify the speed traps. So hopefully there's no police in here. But I think
Apparently they don't mind because they want you to be safer. Yeah.
I think the identification, crowdsourcing the identifications of incidents is getting better and better. The verifications or the validations of, like, after you report all this heavy traffic, and then it actually opens up those data is actually very not accurate right now, because I've found many incidents that
when the incidents go away.
Yeah. Then I literally try driving the traffic, but actually it's a faster way for me. How do you solve that?
It's an interesting question, because theoretically we get to a point where we have enough people on the road that we can tell when the speed picks up. It's not always the case. And so the way we handle it right now is that each incident has a different aging. So there's a standard aging for an accident, a standard aging for a hazard, and they're fairly inaccurate, right? They're like a stake in the ground. They're an optimization, right? But where we'd like to go, and you can see this somewhat already, is if you're a user that's a 5-star user, 100,000 point user, there's a different confidence score we have on your report. The other thing is, you'll notice when there's a report, we'll ask you to give it a thumbs up or tell us that it's not there. The clock starts over again when that happens. So we have these different variables that go into what we call the confidence score, and we're always working on it, but it is definitely one of the big technical challenges.
Another question, sorry, 2 for 1. So is Waze looking at or interested in integrating parking data into their app?
We've looked at parking data. We've done different live experiments over time. You may remember about a year ago when you're approaching your destination, we dropped down all of the parking that was in the area. It was a pretty poor execution. I'd like to see us get to it again one day, but no specific dates on the roadmap or anything. Makes sense, though.
Dan, I remember when Waze first came to town, the entire map was like a Pac-Man game, and we had to eat the little pills.
Actually, I demoed in 2009, I think, and it was like a blank map with a Pac-Man. Yeah. And
I remember like plugging in Waze, and I was like the only Wazer in Marin County at the time or whatnot. Are there still spots on the map where you are still relying on the community to help you build the network?
It's rare these days, but it's an interesting question, because when we look at, in general, okay, we wanted to do something that was crowdsourced, but you can't jump all the way from, well, when we have hundreds of millions of users, it's going to be like this, and to the fact that if you see one other user, you get excited, right? You can't make that leap. So what we did was, instead of making it look like a navigation app or a traffic app at that time, we made it fun. And the basic idea was that you saw yourself driving the roads, you got points, you turned into a Pac-Man, you were validating the roads. We knew that it wasn't good enough to be navigation, but we conveyed that was the mission, but we had to just make it fun. And that was an interesting enough story that Apple featured it and Android featured it, and we could get a little bit of excitement and engagement from the users at that time. We call that the build phase. And we're not in the build phase in very many places right now. I mean, if you go to Syria or Iran, I mean, there are certain places where we just don't have Wazers, and we've never sought out map data, and we're not allowed to do any proactive outreach. So there are places, but there are, I would say, more political reasons than technical reasons why we were in areas where we wouldn't.
Oh, I have one other question. So, like, have you been able to use your data to answer kind of bigger questions around the causes of traffic? So this is like a silly example, but like in the Bay Area, like this week or this past week, traffic has really sucked. And like, I can't tell if it's because it's parents whose kids have gone back to school, so they're back at work, or if it's because there's like a ton of police speed traps for whatever reason. Like, but like, because you have all this data over time, like, do you have like theories that you can now suggest around traffic causes?
We do have theories, but it's kind of a luxury to have that kind of analytical expertise and to be able to sit down and look at our data like that. So it's something that we've only initiated, I would say, in the past couple of months. So there have been no real aha moments. But even looking at, someone came to us, I guess it was from ABC in the Bay Area, and there were 2 closures, one on Memorial Day, one on Labor Day, of the same stretch of the road, and they asked us to compare, to make a prediction based on what had happened before. So we looked up the data, and what we found was that there was almost no traffic, right? And I think it was the Monday where you would think that there was a lot of traffic for people coming back, and there was almost no traffic. But that Tuesday going back to work was like 3x slower speeds than every prior Monday or Tuesday for the last couple of months. So small things like that still, we're just starting to glean. There's a tremendous amount of information, and we're just starting to unlock it. But I think it's an exciting thing to start looking at for sure.
All right, and I'm going to wrap it up with a quick revenue model question. Is it all in the data?
Let's put it this way. It's all in the users, and we will only have lots and lots of engaged users who use us addictively if we have great data. So in that way, it's all about the data, but we have an advertising model, right? This location-guided advertising, and so everything that we do is about keeping that user base happy, and we monetize the happy user base. So the data is the byproduct, you know, it's just what keeps people happy and engaged and trusting our service.
Got it. All right, that's it.
Thanks, guys.
Very cool. Thank you, Di-Ann.